Welcome to this class. This is, I don't know what number class in this series of Transcending Our Limitations. This is a class on the six perfections. So we're going to do a few prayers before we begin, as usual. So if Heather can put those on the screen, we'll first do the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, as well as the verses of homage to all of the holy beings that we are kind of beseeching, seeking their inspiration, their blessings, so that we can become just like them. We can achieve the same realizations as them. So let's recite this praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. You can even visualize the Buddha in the space before you and think that the Buddha is the same essence as all these enlightened beings, as all of our gurus, all those special guides that we have in this world. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith, I pay homage. So before we recite this next verse, this is actually going to come into play in our teachings today, how having this conviction in the law of cause and effect and the results that we have from our virtuous actions and the results we want to avoid that come from our non-virtuous actions, how we need to have this strong conviction in this. So as we recite this verse, think about those teachings, your own familiarity with them, your own level of faith, of conviction in them. And then also, of course, the third line, where we recall the deeper work that we have to eventually aspire to do, to completely subdue our minds, to change our minds in the way that the Buddha advises us to do, so that we can be free of all suffering. We can achieve the state of nirvana, liberation, but moreover, the state of enlightenment. So let's recite this verse, bringing those teachings into mind. And then the next verse has these teachings that are similes from the Vajracutter Sutra to help us to think about the conditioned phenomena, their nature in a conventional way in terms of their impermanence, but the deeper reality of those things in terms of their emptiness. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. And by the way, if you're curious about that verse from Vajracutter, I actually am planning to go through that on Wednesday night in Wednesday night's class. So just so you know, that will be a way to look at some of the meaning behind those 9 similes. So now we do a mandala offering on the next screen, and this will give us a chance to kind of create this merit by making this vast, pure offering to the refuge field, to the Buddhas, our gurus, so that we can receive their blessings. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon, I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryata Yami. And then finally, refuge and bodhicitta before the teaching. These 2 thoughts, bring those to mind as we recite the verse first time in English and then the next 2 times in Tibetan. And then also the motivation of bodhicitta we'll meditate on shortly, but already cultivate that sincere wish, that aspiration to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyen gi pe sanam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shog sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyen gi pe sanam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shog. Okay, thank you, Heather. Let's go ahead and do a short meditation then. Before we begin, give ourselves a chance to focus the mind a bit, let go of whatever distractions we might have, as well as then to generate the motivation of bodhicitta, which I'll lead you in a short reflection on. Today, actually, I think I'm going to do a little bit longer meditation to explore these three types of laziness that we went into last week, rather than me teaching on them a bit more or reviewing that. I think it would be good to review that in meditation. I actually asked you to do that at the end of last class, but I would imagine many of you didn't get the opportunity to do that or would appreciate another chance to review them in that way. So we'll do a short reflection on the three types of laziness and our desire to overcome those, how we actually do overcome those hindrances to our joyous enthusiasm for our practice. Okay, so begin with just a few minutes of quiet meditation on the breath. No doubt every one of you has some way that you've worked with the breath before, so I don't need to give any instruction. Just maintain your awareness of the breath as best as you can. When the mind wanders away and we see that that's happened, bring the mind back to the breath. So I'll ring the bell here to begin the meditation period. So before we cultivate the motivation of bodhicitta, let's take a look at this topic of laziness that actually has three different varieties, three different ways that it manifests. And in terms of bodhicitta, recall that bodhicitta actually consists of two divisions. In one presentation, we can talk about the aspirational bodhicitta, which is what we're going to be developing as our motivation for being here, the wish to go to the state of enlightenment for the sake of all beings. But then there's engaging bodhicitta, which is when our practice actually begins. When motivated in that way through aspirational bodhicitta, we actually commit ourselves to engaging in the perfections of a bodhisattva, what we are discussing in this course. So we see that laziness is one of the main obstacles to having that full engagement in the practices of a bodhisattva. So it's very important that we identify very clearly how this manifests in our lives, how it is an obstacle, and do what we can to overcome that hindrance. So first, let's reflect on our own experience with the first type of laziness, what we often simply call the laziness of procrastination. This is what we generally refer to as laziness in our culture, where we have a willingness to practice Dharma to some degree. We may have that aspiration, but there's a sense that there's no time for it now, that we just put it off. Oh, I will meditate and go on retreat when I'm much older, when I have more time. This is a mind that can become very pervasive and keep us from engaging in the practice that we need to on a more continuous basis. So first, just reflect on that in terms of your own experience with this type of laziness, this lethargy, this procrastination. Then whatever your own assessment is of how this laziness operates in your life, recognize that we can overcome this. And one of the main reflections to do so is to recall impermanence and death, particularly that the time of death is uncertain. It is inevitable that every one of us will die, and we like to think that it will come at a ripe old age when we've lived a very full, very long life. But there are no guarantees. We see it in the world around us right now. People at all ages dying from coronavirus, even dying from other things. This has always been with us, this uncertainty of when death will actually come. Because we're not guaranteed that we'll even have the rest of today, much less tomorrow or many years to come, we have to have that impetus to use this life well right now, to not procrastinate, to not put things off. So again, this can be a bit of a harsh teaching to accept and to work with, but it's reality. The Buddha is teaching us this and waking us up to this simply because this is how we can actually achieve the goals that we seek, is by using every moment in this very meaningful way and not putting off our practice, therefore. So just reflect for a minute or two on the reality of death, the uncertainty of the time of death, and make some sort of a commitment to yourself to recall that at those times when this type of laziness manifests, so that you can then squelch that and be more committed throughout your day to practicing the Dharma. Then let's reflect on the second type of laziness, which is something that we often don't think of as laziness, because it actually can be busyness. It's the way that we fill our lives with so many things that we're generally quite attached to. These are all of the things of cyclic existence that we can get caught up in. We can fill our days with so much that we prefer to do, that we want to do because of our attraction and our attachment to these things. That attraction to these mundane affairs ends up wasting our time, but moreover, it creates non-virtue. Recall that the very first step of turning one's mind towards the Dharma means to let go of our attachment to worldly affairs, to mundane things. It doesn't mean that we don't do those. We all have to engage in some level of mundane affairs, of shopping for groceries, cooking food, going to work, talking to relatives, friends. But we can do those things as part of our practice if we're very skillful. But we have to recognize how we get caught up in these patterns of attachment pull us into these worldly activities, and we end up wasting our time and creating non-virtue. So here too, just spend a minute or so reflecting on how this is operative in your life. We all have this to some degree. What we might call again this laziness of busyness, our attraction to worldly activities that are meaningless. And then we can develop a remedy to that hindrance in particular by thinking about how there are great disadvantages if we spend our life with this attachment being the dominant force. We create more negative karma. We become more deeply entwined with the pleasures of this life. And these, again, are very fleeting and meaningless. They don't lead to any real satisfaction. So there are great disadvantages, including the negative karma that we create when we spend all of our time caught up in worldly affairs with that mind of desire. It would be much more fruitful if we were to spend our time cultivating more positive qualities, cultivating compassion, wisdom, generosity, patience. It would be great benefits if we were using this life in that way. So reflect on the disadvantages of continuing to follow that mind of attraction to worldly activities and the advantages of cultivating more virtue. Then let's go on to examine briefly the third type of laziness, which here too we tend not to see as laziness. We just see this again as our own internal way of defeating ourselves. This is called the laziness of inadequacy or despondency, where we think about all of the practices on the path or the goal of complete enlightenment, or even what we might have to endure to accomplish that. And we get discouraged. We think that somehow we're incapable of doing that. These feelings of incapacity become pervasive and one of the worst obstacles to our progress on the path. Because if we think we can't possibly accomplish the goal and all that's entailed in getting there, then we never make any effort. We never feel that there's any need to move in that direction. We might even still have some level of aspiration, but it becomes very, very weak because we think somehow we're inadequate. We're incapable of achieving that. So here too, be honest with yourself in the next minute or two. Reflect on how that plays a role in your spiritual practice. No doubt every one of us has some of that in a voice in our head that discourages us from getting on our cushion and meditating or doing deeper study or attending classes or whatever it is that we feel we need to do to engage in spiritual practice. So how do we overcome this? How do we remedy that particular form of laziness? By developing a very strong force of positive views that counteract that negative view, and undermining that negative view through actually recalling, first of all, that every one of us has Buddha nature. This is referring to the fundamental purity of the mind, that at the deepest level, your mind is not stained with the delusions in any sort of inherent or permanent way. These are all adventitiously in our minds. Our greed, our jealousy, our anger, our ignorance, all simply arising because we haven't created the counterforce to them. But our minds are fundamentally pure. Every one of us has that Buddha nature, that ability to develop our minds into the state of a Buddha. And that means we have the ability to do everything that is involved in accomplishing that. These feelings of incapacity are actually not justified. And if we reflect on the Buddha and all these great beings of the past who have attained enlightenment, we see that that's the only difference, is that they simply put the effort, the energy into accomplishing that goal. They no doubt felt just as inadequate as we did at times, but they were able to accomplish it. Therefore, so can we. So, think about this. Spend a minute or two reflecting on that, developing a conviction to overcome that form of laziness as it's operative in your life. So then, to channel this into our motivation of bodhicitta for today's class, think about how, again, all three of these forms of laziness can be operative at different times in our life. But we need really strong counterforces to help us to develop a deep rooted enthusiasm, a perseverance on our path. And a lot of it begins, as we'll see today, with this factor of aspiration, which bodhicitta is. It's sometimes called a desire or an aspiration. This is a very positive form of mind. where we set our sights on the goal of helping all sentient beings perfectly. And we recognize that to do that, we have to become a Buddha ourselves. This strong aspiration can be central to helping us to overcome all of these hindrances, these three types of laziness, as well as anything else that obstructs our development on the path. And this is where our path begins, is by having that wish, that desire to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings. And then when we unite it with this enthusiasm and this full engagement in the practices, without a doubt, we can accomplish that goal, as we just meditated on in terms of our Buddha nature and our ability to accomplish full enlightenment. So generate that motivation that is grounded in that understanding and with a sincere wish to be of the greatest benefit to all beings by working on yourself, developing your own unbridled enthusiasm for practice, and then engaging fully in everything that it takes to accomplish that goal. So I hope that was okay to do a little longer meditation, but I felt it was, again, a nice way to spend some time contemplating on these three types of laziness, which, again, we don't necessarily always identify as laziness, but it's important that we see that they're obstacles to developing this fourth perfection of the perfection of joyous effort. So I'm going to do some slide sharing, so I will need the slide sharing thing, if Heather can do that for me. So I just wanted to do a quick review of what I did talk about a little bit last week. There you go. Thank you. Appreciate it, Heather. So I'll put up the slideshow here. And keep in mind that all these slides I am passing along to Mary in a PDF format that you can access at the Dropbox. So you can take notes certainly if you want as we go through this, but know that all of these are out there. And I've been generally sharing from Geshe Lodin's book, Path to Enlightenment in Tibetan Buddhism, and also Rinpoche's book, The Six Perfections, because he's got some wonderful teachings in there. And today I will share a bit more from his book on this joyous effort. If I get to that point, I think I will. So these are the six perfections that we're going through in this course. And we're trying to, again, make it very practical. How do we actually engage in these things? Recall that, as I said last week, and as I've been pointing out throughout this course, these six are said to be set out in terms of increasing difficulty. So it's relatively easy to practice generosity, at least some forms of generosity, to give away really huge things, even to give away our bodies, which is said to be required further along the path. Not that we have to do that, but we have to have the willingness to do that. But this is, where it could become much harder. But nonetheless, generosity is easier to practice, it's said, than ethics. Ethics easier than patience. And as we saw when we went through patience, that's quite difficult. But joyous effort, to really get to at this level of enthusiasm for our practice that is part of this perfection of joyous effort, I think is quite challenging. Can be seen as more difficult than patience. And then we'll be going on to concentration and wisdom in the new year as well, to kind of examine the difficulties we encounter there. But not to get discouraged by these difficulties, to recognize that as we cultivate each of these levels, we can have some confidence to move forward. This is also something we're going to touch on today, that we kind of gain a greater conviction when we have successes along the way and can rest on those and move forward, always increasing our practice. So the perfection of joyous effort was described by Geshe Lodin as a mental factor taking delight in objects of virtue. When conjoined with a bodhicitta motivation, it becomes a perfection of joyous effort. So what we mean by perfections, once more, is we give the name of the result to the cause. So the result is to have these all fully perfected in the state of Buddhahood. A Buddha doesn't have to do any more work. A Buddha is essentially has a perfect mind with all of these qualities fully developed. And so we are engaging in them as the cause for accomplishing that perfection. So we're calling them a perfection. They aren't perfected yet while we are in our unenlightened state, but upon attaining Buddhahood, they will be. So this is the idea of joyous effort, is its real delight in objects of virtue. right now we take delight in objects of non-virtue frequently, or at least, things that we get quite caught up in, that we have great attachment for, and so on. We saw that's one of our forms of laziness. Well, we have to take greater delight in what actually is the cause of true happiness. All of these fleeting experiences we have with things, as we meditated on a few minutes ago, these really aren't anything we want to put all of our money on. So last week we also went into the first topic, which was the 3 types of joyous effort. Very briefly, again, you have these on your handout as well. Armor-like joyous effort is what we prepare ourselves with, kind of having that enthusiasm that is determined from the beginning as we start to engage in our practices, whatever those might be, that we're going to see it through, that we're going to do this very joyfully and with strong dedication. And then we have the other 2, gathering virtue and acting for the welfare of others, which are similar to what we saw with ethics. The perfection of ethics had 3 types. The first one was abandoning non-virtue. The second one, ethics of gathering virtue. The ethics of acting for the welfare of others. Well, here with the second and third, it's just applying that idea of taking real delight in engaging in gathering virtue, in that ethical behavior. Kind of, going beyond just doing it, which, I suppose some of us, will still do these acts and be happy to do them, but we might not do them so joyfully. We might think, oh, well, I'm happy to engage in these, understanding that virtue is good to engage in, but I don't have that much enthusiasm for doing it. So here it's taking the practices of gathering virtue and acting for the welfare of others, for those who are sick, who need help, and so on, and doing that very joyfully. Being delighted. They say a bodhisattva is just so delighted hearing the words, can you help me? Can you give me something? Can you be of benefit to me? And we have to look at ourselves and see to what degree are we as joyful when we hear those words from others, when we get a phone call from somebody who says they need help or what have you, or on the street when someone is in dire need and they ask us for some assistance. So we see that these are, again, the ways that we apply our joyous effort in these 3 types or 3 divisions. And then I don't want to review too much because we did that in the meditation, but just mention briefly these 3 types of laziness: procrastination, attraction to meaningless activity, and inadequacy, and how we need to overcome those. And we saw the respective remedy for each of those. And of course, there are other factors that contribute to our joyous effort, which is what we're going to look at next, these sort of aids to cultivating that state of mind. So any questions up to this point in terms of what we've talked about previously? I just want to check in with questions before we go on. Is there anything in the chat box, or no? Don't think so. Okay. So hopefully, again, you had some opportunity to reflect on those 3 types of laziness, and we did do the meditation today. So it is important that we be honest with ourselves. I mentioned last week, I think it was when I brought up this term from Cheryl Huber, who's a Zen practitioner. She has a book called Making Change for Good, and the idea is that she generates, or that she has in there, that I want to share with you, is this idea of what we need to generate, this compassionate self-discipline. We need some self-discipline on our path, without a doubt. We hate this word, I think. Self-discipline makes it sound like, oh my God, you're forcing me to do what? But it's you doing this out of your own interest. It's you taking care of yourself because you are concerned about your own suffering and want yourself to be happy. And of course, others, you want the same. But this is what we mean by compassionate self-discipline. We have to have some ability to look at ourselves critically and examine what it is that we are doing and not doing, and make some concerted effort to move in a different direction. Otherwise, we're going to keep doing what we're doing and have the same results. Not be so happy with what the outcome of all of this is. So we need some self-discipline, but it has to be compassionately directed, meaning that there's an understanding that this is about our own good and the good of others. Remember that, we go back to some of the basic teachings about developing bodhicitta. We have those 2 states of mind, the one that we're currently involved in, which is our self-centeredness, our self-cherishing, the other that is the other-oriented mind that's cherishing them, taking care of them, being concerned about them. And recall that when we are in the mind of self-cherishing, this is actually a lose-lose situation. Not only do others lose because we're not cherishing them and attending to them, taking care of them, developing our minds so we can be a benefit to them, but we lose because we follow this mind of self-cherishing. that brings about all suffering, that causes us to engage in non-virtue and become attached to all the things in our life and not want to let all of that go because we get quite focused on me, myself, and I and what I need. So it's a lose-lose situation if we follow the mind of self-cherishing. It's a win-win situation if we follow the mind of cherishing others, of holding them as most dear, which of course is the essence of bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is wanting others to have their welfare enacted as completely as possible. And of course, the recognition that to do that, we have to develop ourselves. That's why His Holiness calls us being wisely selfish. Bodhicitta is your wise, selfish mind. If you really want to take care of yourself, take care of others. If you really want to be happy to the greatest degree, then be concerned and focused on the happiness of others. So again, this is how we want to approach this, is really having that understanding and recognizing that this is the root of our practice, to be continually focused on others. So if we look at all three of those types of laziness, they are very self-centered. They're very much a product of our self-cherishing, right? The self-cherishing that is mañana, mañana, I'll do it later, because we just kind of want to sleep or we want to just chill. We don't really feel like getting on up, getting on our cushion and doing the meditation and the work, or the attraction to worldly activities, which is obviously so rooted in self-cherishing. Me just staying content in my own little bubble of what makes me happy. And of course, it's not real happiness because it's in the nature of suffering. It doesn't lead to anything that beneficial. And then, of course, the mind of self-defeatism, of inadequacy, which is also a self-centered view. It's looking at it from the point of view of, oh, poor me, I can't accomplish anything. I'm so miserable. I'm so weak in my practice. Well, it's not thinking about the fact that we actually have the potential to develop ourselves to the greatest degree, to benefit others, to actually be of unbelievable benefit to all sentient beings. So it's a very self-centered mind, the mind of laziness, in all three of these. So again, we need to shift away from all of those tendencies that we have, that we've developed over time, over countless eons, and move into more positive directions. All right, let's go back then to the slides, and I'll go on to the next topic, which is also in your handout, which is at the Dropbox. And this is a little introduction to this by Geshe Loden from his Lam book. He says, to build your capacity for joyous effort, you need to be skillful. And he points out, as the traditional Lam texts do, 4 forces that are conducive to generating this unbridled enthusiasm, this joyous perseverance in our practice. And this is just a brief introduction to these. We're going to go into these in more detail as part of today's talk. The first, he says, begin by developing a strong aspiration. As I mentioned earlier in the meditation, this is where a lot of it begins, is with this aspiration. We have to have this force of mind that is really desiring to go the full distance, understanding what is involved in that, the mechanism of cause and effect that will bring about the results that we're seeking. Secondly, then build your confidence by working in stages and building success on top of success. I also alluded to this earlier, right? We need to have this sort of steadfastness that keeps committed to accomplishing each step, each part of the path, continuing to move forward, building on the success that we've had previously with our own practice of the Dharma. The third is to develop a sense of joy at your success and practice, so that enjoyment isn't crushed by too much intensity. We could really get quite intense in our practice and think that we've got to just keep pushing, 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 and we might get really a little too serious about it. We need to have some joyful component. Recall that this is called joyous effort. It's not simply called effort. It has to have that taste of joy that is so important in our practice. The fourth is when you are tired, and not before. Don't uh, kind of quit before you're having accomplished something. If you are tired, you've sort of done the work that needs to be done, and you need to rest, then do so. Take a rest. Relax so that you can rejoin your practice fresh and enthusiastic again. Geshe Loden calls this the power of discarding. I prefer the term relinquishing. Discarding makes it sound like you're just getting rid of it entirely, but you're relinquishing it for the moment. You're setting it aside for the moment. Sometimes that would be another word or phrase that we could use for this, the power of setting aside. We recognize that we can't work 24/7 yet. We don't have that ability. So we have to take a rest. We have to do what we need to do to replenish our energy. So these are the four that we're going to go into in more detail and discuss. So I noticed that there were some things in the chat box. Let me make sure that there's no questions before I kind of move forward. No, those are just the handouts. Wonderful. Okay, thank you for posting this. Let's go back then to the in each of these individually and talk about them. Again, most of what's on the screen, I'll let you know certainly where there are new things, but right now I'm going to share what's on your handout as well. As it is, whoops, I think I missed one here. Did I? No, that's it. As it is said that yearning acts as the basis for joyous perseverance, aspiration here refers to yearning. The way to develop aspiration is to meditate on how pleasant and unpleasant effects arise from virtuous and non-virtuous karma, respectively. So it's kind of interesting that they say, here we are, we're on the path of the Bodhisattva, the great scope. Recall that again in our teachings of the Lamrim, we have those 3 levels. Well, karma is taught on the very first level. Not at the great scope, not at the 3rd level, but karma, again, although it's introduced at the lower level, is the operative principle for all the results that we seek for attaining those as we go through the entire path to enlightenment. If you want to achieve a good rebirth, of course, you need to be attentive to karma in regard to avoiding non-virtue and engaging in virtuous actions that will result in a good rebirth in the next life and in the lifetimes to come. If you want to attain liberation, freedom from your own suffering, having developed renunciation and the sincere wish to be free from all suffering, well, then you have to create the causes for that. That's also rooted in karma. Karma is the operative principle for attaining that result as well. And then, of course, at the great scope, karma is essential to have that conviction that if we create the causes, the results will follow. And if we create the causes for enlightenment, regardless of whether we want to be enlightened or not, if we've created all the causes, the results will follow. This is, again, the principle of karma that is so essential to all of the teachings of the Buddha and to all of our practice. So how do we develop that initial yearning or aspiration to move in the direction of bodhicitta? The foundational practice is to develop aspiration, to develop the desire to, kind of be committed to seeing through cause and effect, to seeing through what we need to do to accomplish the goal that we are seeking. So if we need to, if we want to accomplish enlightenment, well, then we need to be dedicated to developing bodhicitta. And of course, that's on the basis of all the other parts of the Lam-rim that preceded this. And then to engaging in the 6 perfections, and to engaging in the 4 means of gathering disciples, and to seeing all of that through, because if we have a firm conviction in cause and effect, then our aspiration, our yearning, is rooted in something that is actually the means to attain that. So this is where they do say that aspiration or this yearning does arise on the basis of faith. We're going to see this in the next slide. So let me go ahead and share that, and we'll talk a little bit about faith in Buddhism, because it is presented a little bit differently than how faith might be seen in other spiritual traditions. Faith, he says, acts as a basis for yearning. So when one has the faith of conviction in the 2 types of karma and their results, one will consequently aspire to eliminate non-virtuous karma and to adopt virtuous karma. And again, virtuous karma includes everything that is at all 3 levels of the path. The virtuous actions that we need to engage in that are part of the 3 higher trainings of, not just our morality, but also our concentration, our wisdom, and of course, the virtuous karma that is created through the 6 perfections that we are practicing and learning about in this course, and so on. So let's talk about faith, and it mentions specifically the faith of conviction. Faith in Buddhism has 3 different dimensions to it, and none of them are blind faith. This is what was refreshing to me when I came to Buddhism, because I came from a Catholic tradition where I felt like I was required to have a lot of blind faith, a lot of faith in something that was like, oh, well, you just can't know that. That's a mystery. That's only, in God's purview. You'll never understand that. You just have to have faith. You just have to have faith. Well, that's not what we mean by faith at all in Buddhism. The very first level of faith, in the way that I present them, they're sometimes presented in slightly different ways, but we can see them in levels, but we can also see them very circular, that they influence each other. But the very first level is what's called lucid faith or clear faith. And that arises on the basis of our own study and examination of things, and we come to have some clarity of the objects of faith that we are examining, of the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, of the Four Noble Truths, of the path to enlightenment, we begin to kind of see it clearly. And by virtue of that, we already are generating some faith because it is resonant with our own reasoning and analysis. It already begins to have something that is a root for our aspiration, but not yet fully qualified in my mind as the full faith of conviction that we need to have. That's the third level. The second level of faith is sometimes called aspiring or wishing faith. And that's where, once we have that clarity of what's all entailed, we begin to move in the direction of that. We begin to think about, oh, well, what would it be like for me to practice that? And we have that faith that we can actually engage in those teachings and begin our progress of moving towards the goals of the spiritual path of Buddhism. But the third level comes about when we generate a deeper conviction, which in my estimation comes about through experience. You know, conviction, uh, we can gain a certain amount of that through just our reflection on the Dharma here and there and our reading and what have you. But we need to begin to taste the results of this. For example, I mean, when we went through patience previously in November, when we were talking about engaging in various ways of reframing things so that we can diminish our anger and increase our patience and tolerance in the face of things such as people harming us or sufferings we have to endure. Well, when we begin to taste the reality of that, that when we do think in that way, when we have a force of mind that allows us to reframe things and thereby keep our anger from arising, well, then you have a much greater faith in the Dharma, right? Because you've tasted the effects of that. You don't yet have a realization of emptiness, perhaps, or, some great realization further down the path, or you certainly don't have full enlightenment yet, but you have something that gives you that conviction. This is sometimes called even believing faith. It means that you now have this belief that is determined that this is correct, that this is actually the way out, that this is actually what we have to do. So we first gain that clarity by examining the teachings. We begin to aspire to move in that direction. And then we get convinced that this is actually the path. This is actually the way to work on developing our minds, diminishing our negative tendencies, increasing our positive ones. So we all have to get to that place of faith of conviction at some point. If our faith stays at the lower levels, in my estimation, it doesn't ever really become something that we fully commit to. So when they talk about, and we'll get into this actually when we talk about the next perfection, the perfection of concentration, when they talk about the laziness that is the obstacle to our engaging in meditation fully, they say there are 4 antidotes to that. The very first one is faith, and these are seen as a hierarchy. We have to have this faith of conviction that really knows that this is the direction we want to move in. And in regard to developing concentration or meditation, that's because we are convinced that that is what we need to do. That in order for us to actually change our minds, we've studied meditation, all of the various stages that we'll look at when we get to that next topic, that next perfection. And we have this strong conviction that this is going to work. I'm going to be able to develop my mind in that degree. Therefore, aspiration arises. That's the second of the 4 antidotes to laziness. Well, guess what the third one that arises on the basis of aspiration? It's effort. It's the actual endeavoring to do that. You have to first, of course, have some faith that what you're going to be engaging in, some aspiration to want to engage in it, to move in that direction, and then the commitment to it, the actual effort. And that results, they say, the fourth antidote that we see. And again, we'll go through these in the concentration classes, is pliancy or suppleness, a serviceability of our minds and bodies that actually does occur as we work more and more with meditative practice, where actually we become greater adepts, more adept at actually we're using our mind to develop single-pointed concentration. So even in that presentation, we see the essential kind of order in terms of faith needing to be the basis for our yearning or our aspiration. And from that yearning and aspiration, effort naturally would flow. Because if we aspire to move in that direction, grounded in faith, grounded in our conviction that this is actually the right way to go to accomplish what it is we want to achieve, then we have great enthusiasm for the practice. So it was brought up by, I think it was Larry. I don't see Larry on here with us today, but maybe he'll be listening to these teachings on the recording. He brought up this idea of kind of feeling that he doesn't have as much joy in his practice. And some of us go through this, right? And maybe some of us are in this state right now ourselves, and it's totally understandable. Things start to become a little bit rote, and we start doing things in a more routine way, and they don't really seem to have much juice or enthusiasm to them. Well, one of the key pieces of advice is that we have to go back to this aspiration that is grounded in faith and once more check up that process. Because if we have those firmly in place, I think that effort naturally follows in a joyous way, in a way that we can actually really delight in, because we are aspiring for something that we are convinced is absolutely the way to accomplish what we seek for ourselves and for others. So our study is a good part of that, without a doubt. That's where our faith begins, right? And when we have that thorough knowledge of the Dharma and we can recall it very easily, that is very helpful. But that has to, again, start moving us in a direction, and we have to start gaining some experience with that. Yeah. They sometimes refer to the Dharma as medicine, right? And they say that one of the worst things for us to do is to treat that medicine as if it's just so precious that we never even take it. We like put it in if you went to somebody's house and they had all this medicine in a medicine cabinet, and you go, wow, you have a lot of very powerful medicine there. Does all this stuff work? And you say, well, I don't know, I've never used it. Well, there wouldn't be much use to that, right? We have to actually use the medicine. We have to take the medicine. And that's, again, our own investigation into the teachings that will help us to develop the conviction that this stuff works. And I'm sure all of you have some experience with that, or you wouldn't keep coming back every Sunday and, going to the classes that you do and continuing to engage in practice. You have to have something that is keeping you moving forward, right? That you've got some experience, some taste of the Dharma that makes you recognize that that's it. That's where I need to go. Well, that's the basis, again, for this aspiration. Because if we have that level of conviction, without a doubt, we will aspire and feed into this. And again, as was pointed out by Geshe Loden and is pointed out in the traditional teachings, this aspiration is rooted in the law of cause and effect, rooted in karma, because that's, again, the whole principle that we are investigating. One of the tricky things about karma, as you know, is that we can't prove that to anybody. People can come up to me and say, well, what's this deal with karma? I mean, how do you know that this is working in the world? Well, we can't prove it. I can't tell anybody, well, I know that the reason why you're experiencing this right now is because you did this 5 lifetimes ago, and now it's ripening based on all these causes and conditions and da 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 da. I mean, we can't prove that to anybody, but we can begin to taste that ourselves once more through our own practice. We know that if we do certain things, such as what I was mentioning of reframing our mind so that anger doesn't arise, so that we are more patient, that we see the results then. We see how much nicer it is to be in that calmer state, even when somebody's red-faced and yelling at us, that we can actually maintain our peace, our cool, and even have positive thoughts towards them at that time. How we're going to be much better off as individuals in the world when we do that. And the world is therefore going to be much better because we're doing that. We can begin to see that. We can begin to know that. That's what this faith of conviction is. Let me go back to Geshe Loden again and carry on with what he was talking about in that section. He says, again, that faith is the basis for this yearning. Because then we aspire to eliminate anything that is antithetical to our path, all the obstacles, all the hindrances, and to adopt what is more virtuous. And then he quotes Shantideva, who said in his, again, here it's called engaging in the Bodhisattva deed. Sometimes we use the term the way of the Bodhisattva or the Bodhisattva's way of life. This is from chapter 7, which is the chapter pertaining to joyous effort. The Mighty One himself has said that aspiration is the root of every facet of virtue. Its root is constant acquaintance with the ripening effects of actions, our developing a deeper faith of conviction that if we engage in particular actions, we will get the results we want from them, especially if we engage in positive actions, patience and generosity and ethical behavior and what have you, that we will get the results that we are seeking, that we will actually have that level of aspiration to practice then because of that faith of conviction in karma, in the law of cause and effect. So the aspiration to engage in the practice of virtue is developed by contemplating again and again the great advantages of doing so and the disadvantages of not doing so. So this is, again, the root of our aspiration. We have to have that firm conviction in karma and have the knowledge that there are great advantages if we continue to practice virtue, to engage in the bodhisattva deeds. And if we don't, we're going to simply stay in our unenlightened state and continue to be under the sway of our karma and our delusions. Then he goes on to say, by understanding the positive karmic results of virtue and the negative ripening results of non-virtue, you will be persuaded to engage in virtue. And this is what I was alluding to earlier, that he says very clearly, this is a form of enlightened self-interest and self-preservation. Again, we don't want to make it be that delusion of like self-centeredness and self-cherishing. But if we really are having an enlightened self-interest, if we really do care about ourselves as much as we want to care about others as well, well, then we engage in what will help us to get to that place of enlightenment. We aspire to do that. This enlightened self-interest is what His Holiness means by saying that this is how we're wisely selfish. If you really want to take care of yourself, then we have to aspire on a path that is about caring for others. The Bodhisattva path is one where others are the main objective. In that mind of bodhicitta, we have these two aspirations, and Rinpoche always points out how the main aspiration is to benefit all beings. It's to cherish them to that degree where we want to become dedicated to their welfare without a doubt. Their temporal welfare to some degree, but their ultimate welfare at the greatest degree, because we want them to achieve states of lasting peace and happiness through liberation and enlightenment. Well, that is actually, again, the way that we can accomplish our own happiness as well. And that's why the second aspiration is to become a Buddha. To do that is, of course, we recognize that to accomplish that, we do have to work on ourselves, but that will completely accomplish your own welfare. But the main objective is the welfare of others. The secondary objective is to accomplish your welfare to do that. You're never out of the picture. With bodhicitta, you are also achieving your greatest happiness while you are being dedicated and dedicating yourself to helping others to achieve theirs. So this is an important part of our aspiration as well, is to kind of see that it's rooted in that very firm understanding. Let me see if I've got maybe any more things to share on aspiration. No. So let's go ahead and take our break then. It's 11 o'clock and we'll take about 10 minutes in. So at 11:10, we'll reconvene and we'll go on to the second of these four forces conducive to joyous effort. And we'll see if there are any questions as well. Okay, have a good break. Okay, good. Well, I do see Larry there now. I guess my little set of boxes didn't have Larry there. So let me talk a little bit more before I see if there are any questions. I was just talking about how aspiration is one of the things that might be a force that we can use to renew that sort of joy in our practice, to kind of make us feel a little more enthusiastic about things. And I wanted to talk about some of the other things that I think are useful to help us to gain that aspiration in my experience, and then therefore to feel like kind of I have a fresher involvement in what I'm doing in terms of my daily practice or whatever. Obviously, it's something we all struggle with. So it's not to say, again, that we should not expect that that's going to happen. But nonetheless, it is important that we find some way of addressing that. One of the things is to, in my estimation, one of the most powerful ways to renew our practice is to go on retreat. And many of you have done that in terms of your own personal practice. Nowadays, with COVID going on, of course, it's not so easy sometimes to find a place to do retreat. We might end up doing retreat in the home that we've been doing retreat in for many months in a different way. But nonetheless, if you have a period of time where you dedicate yourself to doing more practice without having to pay attention to sort of the everyday things, frequently you come out of that with a renewed enthusiasm for your practice. So sometimes it's because we're just doing things in such a piecemeal way way, and our lives are not so supportive of what we're trying to accomplish with our practice. It also helps sometimes, though, to engage in something different during your retreat. Not just to do your regular practices that you do, but to actually do something that will give you kind of a fresh perspective on Dharma. Um, for example, I mean, I had the good fortune of being able to do retreat at a home that was loaned to me through one of the students up in Taos. And so it was up in Colorado, and I was able to be there for about 2 weeks. And so I decided I would do something very different with that 2 weeks. Again, continue doing my other practice, but I'd work with green Tara and doing a more or less a green Tara retreat. And it was really quite wonderful to do something very different, where you're doing a lot of mantra recitation and visualizations and things, and then to kind of come out of that and feel kind of a different energy, a shift in our energy. I've also found, like, when I feel like some stuckness in my practice, doing some of the preliminary practices, what are often called the ngundro, that's a Tibetan word for it. Essentially, these get us back into a place where we're cultivating a different type of energy. I didn't accomplish my ngundro on this. I was just wanting to do it as a practice. But this doing mandala offerings, many of you have done this before, where you have the whole little mandala set with the rings and all this. There's something very kinesthetic about doing that that's very different than meditating. And there's a meditation involved in it. It's not that you're just doing this little building this mandala and that's all that it is. You're supposed to be doing all kinds of visualizations while you're doing that. But doing something like that often gets you out of your box, if you will. If your normal practice is something where you're not doing anything like that, to do something that's like that, or to make satsas, or to do these other sorts of practices that are very physical, as opposed to just simply calming the mind, meditating, reciting things, what have you. There's something that happens there. So that's kind of two things. Is one is to go on retreat, but secondly, to also maybe change up the practice a bit. If you have the ability to do that, to do something different, either on retreat or even as part of a daily practice, then that's kind of a way to shift the energy a little bit, to kind of move things around, if you will. But there are other things that I think are really important, and I probably should have said this one first, but I also find I get great inspiration for my practice and develop a deeper joy and enthusiasm for it when I listen to teachings by my gurus, and especially, like Lama Zopa Rinpoche has been doing all these amazing teachings from Nepal ever since lockdown started back in March, April. He's been going online and giving these teachings, and it can take some time because Rinpoche teaches in a very kind of gradual way. Some of the teachings are a bit longer than others, but the transcripts are there. You can download the transcripts. You can listen to Rinpoche. If you feel a closeness to Rinpoche and want to have kind of a hit of him in your life, there are many ways to obtain that, especially now during this period where we're in shutdown. Being in the presence of someone like Rinpoche or other teachers is also, of course, a very powerful way to gain more inspiration for our practice. The gurus are oftentimes that real impetus that we need to go a little bit further. If you do have the desire to spend more time in retreat with Rinpoche, September is when they're planning the next Light of the Path retreat in North Carolina. Some of you have been to those retreats. They're really wonderful opportunities to be in Rinpoche's presence for parts of the day, receiving teachings from him, as well as to be with others, engaging in group practice. Group practice does really help a lot. We did our group practice on Lama Tsongkhapa Day with Geshe Sherab, and it was kind of nice, the energy of everyone being there and engaged in it. We had like 30 people, I think, taking part, over 30 people, I believe. So there's something about that happens there too with that. So that's another thing. It's hard right now with COVID going on that we're limited in what we can do in terms of being in a room with others and engaging in that type of practice. But things will open up. And by September, hopefully, they can hold the retreat in North Carolina, be 2 weeks. And it's a real nice shot in the arm. You come out of that retreat feeling, again, a different enthusiasm for practice, a different desire to kind of fully engage in things, because being in the presence of Rinpoche and hearing him teach is very, very stimulating and motivating. And it's also the same with everyone else who's there, all of our sort of FPMT brothers and sisters who are all engaging in that same type of practice. Also, it helps to read about the lives of these great beings of the past, to spend time with the contemporary teachers who've written biographies, or even with Milarepa, Tsongkhapa. There's a relatively new, I think maybe been out a couple years now, Thupten Jinpa has put together a biography of Tsongkhapa, I guess a translation of texts and what have you that spell out all of Tsongkhapa's life. It's really quite a large book. But nonetheless, if we spend some time reading about these great masters of the past, people who, certainly Milarepa is a good example of somebody who was just mired in awful stuff in his life and was able to transcend that and achieve enlightenment in a single lifetime. It can be really inspiring to have that as well. So sometimes we gain a greater joy in our practice simply by seeing how others have practiced. So there are a number of things that I've found in my experience that can really give a nice injection of energy and make us feel a little bit more recharged about our practice. I know that many of you do have commitments that you have to do on a daily basis, like I do, where, if you have to sort of check that off every day. And sometimes those are problematic for us. They should become tastier over time, but sometimes that's not the case. They actually seem to become a little more repetitive and we sort of lose the energy with it. And sometimes that even happens with our memorizing them. I mean, I have most of my practices memorized so that I can be anywhere and don't need to necessarily pull out those practices to do them. Well, there's pluses and minuses to that. And if that you are in a place where you're kind of just doing everything by memorization, and sometimes it can become a little stale. You might want to just go back to reading it for a while. And it's kind of interesting when you go back and you have it in front of you and you're just reading it. Sometimes you even find things that you've somehow forgotten in your memorization. You left out a line somewhere along the way. But anyway, sometimes just going back to reading it is really useful because it kind of puts you back into that place of seeing it afresh, seeing it with new eyes, because of seeing the words on the page. Because when they're just simply something we've memorized in our own minds, sometimes that happens. It become a little bit more distant for us, not quite as fully charged. But I'm sure there are other things that other people would like to add from their own experience. Maybe we'll go into this now since this topic of aspiration is so key. The other three powers we're going to look at that contribute to our joyous enthusiasm are also important. But it really does start with an aspiration, with a strong desire to kind of get on the cushion, do the work, recite the practices, and then of course the other factors will follow from there. But does anyone have anything they'd like to share from their own experience about how they've recharged their practice, how they found kind of a new enthusiasm for things that they've been doing for many years or what have you? Anyone? I'm sure some of you have some advice, some things that you could share. Anyway, I guess we're not having any takers, so okay. But again, there are going to be times in our practice where we do feel that it sort of dries up a little bit, and we need to find some way to moisten it and keep it flowing and keep it feeling very fresh for us. And these are a few ideas. And if I think of some more, I'll share them. But I'm hoping that that's useful for Larry or for any of you who are having that period in your practice where it sort of feels a little bit stale, a little bit dry. There's not really the great enthusiasm for it. But these other three factors we're going to look at, these other three powers, if you will, after aspiration, will also be factors that we can include in here. Was there anything else on here? No. Okay, good. Thank you for sharing those dates, Mary, in terms, or Heather, whoever. Was that Mary? Yeah, I can't. Anyway, let's go ahead and go back to the slides. The second power, and this again is on what's on your handout before we go into some teachings from Geshe Loden on this. It says developing, it's called steadfastness. Sometimes this is called kind of the ability to sort of see things through, to have that kind of building energy that we talked about very briefly earlier. So he says here, developing the power of steadfastness means that you bring to conclusion, without turning back, anything at which you joyously persevere. Of course, this is a process of this. You don't just necessarily commit yourself to something and then, find out that you really can't do it, and then, you end up turning back. Rather, as it says here in this next slide, you do not try to do everything initially. First, examine the situation carefully. And if you see that you can do it, you then engage in it. Whereas if you can't do it, you don't engage in it. So this does mean that, again, just as we saw with faith, we have to have some understanding of what it is that we are committing ourselves to. Everything that's involved in terms of our everyday practice, as well as the longer practice that we have to engage in to get to enlightenment. We have to have some understanding of that. But once you commit yourself to doing something, whether it be an Ngondro practice, such as saying, I'm going to do my 100,000 Vajrasattva mantras, I'm going to do so many each day, and I'm going to commit to seeing that all the way through. Once you make that determination to do that, that you then have the steadfastness to continue to the end, to see it through to the end. Master Shantideva in his text points out that if we don't do this, then we're going to create this karmic pattern of quitting things, of kind of, signing up and then midway through going, no, I can't really do that, or I don't really feel like doing that. And then we go to something else, and then we do that only halfway as well. And then we go on to something else and we do that only halfway. What in our culture, we have this idea of a jack of all trades and a master of none kind of thing. If we don't actually see something through to its conclusion, we never get the full benefit of that. I found it kind of interesting. Emily Sue, who many of you know, she was a student in the master's program with me. She's now a wonderful teacher, helps out in Colorado quite a bit with the center up there in Denver, as well as teaches on the West Coast because she spends some of her time out in California too. And she read an article once, I think it was with somebody who was like a marathon runner or decathlon athlete or something really pretty outrageous for me to think about. I used to run when I was in high school, do some cross country that was a few miles, but the idea of running 26 miles, or even again some of these greater things like the Ironman competitions and all these sorts of really grueling physical challenges. They were interviewing this one man who was committed in that way to doing that. And the interviewer said, well, don't you ever think about quitting? And he simply said, it's not an option. Quitting isn't an option. I mean, he just doesn't see it as an option, which I thought was really quite an interesting way of looking at it. We still put quitting as one of our options. Well, we can always quit. We can always go, let's set that aside completely and just go do something else. Well, no, if quitting is never an option, if it's not on the table, well, then we see it through to the end without a doubt, because that isn't even an option for us. I think that's what we mean by this idea of this steadfastness, is that we see that quitting isn't an option for us. That whatever we sort of sign up for, whatever we agree to as a practice, and that's why we should do some good checking up before we commit, without a doubt. Check up the vows, look at Bodhisattva vows, really study them well before you engage in them fully. As we're doing it in this course, we're looking at some of the secondary vows here and there that pertain to the six perfections. But the idea is that if you've done that due diligence and you've seen that it's something that you can actually accomplish, then quitting isn't an option. You see it through to its conclusion. You do what you can to get to the end of it, and having that accomplished, there is this energy that comes with that, as I said earlier, that helps you to build on that. You build on success after success after success, because you recognize that this is how we actually get there. As we saw earlier, one of the ways that we overcome our despondency as well is to recognize that every drop of water fills the bucket. We just keep putting the drops of water in, and eventually it will get full. Well, it's the same with these tasks, these practices of a bodhisattva. We want to keep working at them till we get them complete, and then we go on to the next one, and then we get them complete and we go on to the next one. And we just keep doing that, and we build on our success. There's a couple of questions in the chat box. Let me come back to those because I want to continue with steadfastness a little bit, but thank you for putting those in the chat box, and I promise that I will get to them before we conclude today. So this is the idea behind steadfastness that again is on your sheet there, and this final statement, once you do commit to doing it though, once you've checked up, then you must not leave it unfinished, but follow through to completion of the task. Again, that's that idea of quitting not being an option. So a few things from Geshe Loden on this that are actually part of Shantideva's text. In, again, chapter 7 of Shantideva's text, he spends a fair amount of time talking about these four forces that are conducive to developing joyous effort. In regard to this one, he goes into these three types of pride or self-confidence. Pride here not being the delusion of pride, but being a very determined mind that kind of has a feeling of pride to it, but it's not the delusion at all. So he says, Geshe Loden, in introducing this topic, says, if you wish to develop the capacity To finish what you start, it is useful to cultivate 3 forms of pride or self-confidence. Shantideva listed these in his engaging in the Bodhisattva deeds. So this is also a verse from chapter 7. The first 2 lines are where these 3 are listed. And then the first, whoops, sorry, I made a mistake on that third line. That should be, I alone shall do it. I don't know how that got changed. I have no idea. Um, the first 2 lines introduce these 3: actions, delusions, and capability. To these 3 apply self-confidence. So we want to have this pride of actions, pride of delusions, and pride of capability, or self-confidence, again, is a better word at sometimes. But this idea of the first one is, I alone shall do it. That's the self-confidence of action. So what does that one mean? The first, self-confidence of action, is the belief that you do not need to rely on the help and support of anybody else to succeed in your spiritual journey. This doesn't mean that you don't rely upon your gurus and their advice and their uh, inspiration and them giving you teachings and what have you. It means that you're not going to leave it up to someone else to do the work. You are going to do the work yourself. You rest in the confident knowledge that you can accomplish it yourself. You don't say, oh, well, I'm going to let them do that and I can do something or else, or take a rest or whatever. We have this pride. This is why these are called prides, is because it's a sense of an inflated self, but it's not a delusional one. It's one where we actually are virtuously dedicating ourselves to doing everything that we can, not letting someone else do it. You know, thinking, well, others may or may not do this. I'm going to do it. I will have that self-confidence, that pride that I can actually accomplish that. And therefore, I'm going to rest in that and not wait around for someone else to do it. The second, what's called self-confidence of capability, is recognizing that when beings are under the influence of delusion, they cannot achieve even their own aims. So seeing this, you develop the determination to engage in undertakings for them. This is pride-like because it's our thinking. While we look at others and we say, they don't really have the capacity, the capability of actually accomplishing even their own welfare, much less the welfare of others. But we think, I do. That's not out of a delusion and a puffing up of our sense of self. It's rather that commitment, that self-confidence that we can be very capable and we can do whatever needs to be done in engaging in activities to benefit others, that we're going to feel very capable. So the first one was determining that we will do it ourselves. The second one is determining that we can actually accomplish it, that we are capable of doing that. So this is the verse from Shantideva's text that points to that. It says, powerless under delusion, these beings cannot achieve even their own aims. They are incapable, but beings like I are not. For that reason, I will undertake this. With that strong sense that we are capable, we can actually do it. Again, we see how these feed into that steadfastness, that determination we can do it ourselves. We're not going to leave someone else do it, that we are completely capable of accomplishing it, whereas others may not be. And then finally, the third one, what's called self-confidence of delusions. It doesn't mean that the delusions are together with that self-confidence. It means that we are going to endeavor to totally defeat the delusions in whatever way that we can. If the delusions gain victory, then they will completely destroy you. So this is a common theme again in Buddhism, is that we want to have that strong force that is determined to overcome the delusions. This is a sort of prideful mind because we think we're so much better than the delusions. We're going to actually do away with them, defeat them. It's an important thought for us to have, because otherwise, as it says here, they will completely destroy us. You must therefore constantly be watchful of the delusions. If you lack awareness, then even small delusions will be able to harm you. And this is the verse that from Shantideva's text that points this out. Says, when crows encounter a dying snake, they will act as though they were eagles. If I am weak, I shall be harmed by the slightest downfall. There's 2 ways of interpreting this thing, this idea of a crow and a snake, the crow acting like an eagle. One is probably the more common one, where we think that we want to be like kind of act like eagles, even when we're dealing with something like a dying snake, with like a small delusion, a small affliction arising in our mind. Well, even though we're only crows, we're not really fully capable yet as eagles, as like fully developed bodhisattvas. We're going to act as though we're eagles when we are confronting even the smallest delusions, even a dying snake. Crows don't have any fear of a dying snake because it can't do them any harm. Um, so again, even when we have small delusions that may not harm us so much, we're going to behave as if we're eagles. But then there's another way of kind of thinking it from the opposite point, that if we're like the dying snake, and even crows will overcome us, even those mild beasts that don't really have the conviction of an eagle, or sometimes they use the mythical bird, the Garuda, these very strong, powerful things, that even the smallest things will overcome us if we're just like a dying snake, if we don't have great effort in opposing things. But the more common commentary is to think that, again, the delusions are like the crows, and they are, or no, we're like the crows with a mind of eagle, and the dying snake are the delusions that we are trying to overcome, even the smallest level of those delusions. So hopefully that's clear in terms of that commentary. But the idea, as it's said in the last two lines, is the main thing to get across, however we're reading that analogy. If I'm weak, I shall be harmed by the slightest downfall. I think I even shared with you that um, verse, the line from Geshe Ben Kongyo, one of these great Kadampa Geshes, who essentially said, standing at the door of the afflictions, holding the spear of the antidotes, other than this, I have no other job. Like, this is how we want to be working with that kind of self-confidence, that pride, is thinking, I'm ready to combat any delusion that comes in the door. As soon as just the beginnings of attachment arise, I've got the spear of the antidotes. I'm going to do what I can to overcome them. So if we have all three of those forms of pride, we have the pride of actions, that we will do it ourselves, the pride of capability, that we can accomplish it, that we are very capable, we are totally endowed with what we need to do the work, and thirdly, that we are going to overcome any delusions that get in the way, that we will actually be there with the spear of antidotes to combat them, then we will stay steadfast. We will have the tools that we need to actually make it to the full distance, to accomplishing whatever tasks we set out to achieve. So this is the idea behind steadfastness. Let me go back to the slides for just a moment and see kind of where, I don't recall if I have any more on steadfastness. I did throw in some things from Lama Zopa, but I don't think it's quite yet. So this is how Geshe Loden summarizes what I just did. It's very similar to what I just said. The way to practice Dharma with steadiness, then, is to proceed without expecting help from others, to have that pride of actions that we will do it ourselves. Be confident that you have the capability to benefit both yourself and others, whereas they do not. And be determined to overcome the delusions and not allow them to overcome you. So these are also, again, three things that we see feed into the steadiness that is one of these forces that helps us to have joyous effort and enthusiasm. One of the things that I recall sometimes when I'm dealing with work or things to accomplish, because I do have some laziness and procrastination, where I'll sit down and I've got many courses to prepare for, things that I need to do and put together, even some work I might be doing for other people or what have you, and I go, it feels kind of overwhelming now, looking at all these things to do. But you recall the feeling that comes along when you accomplish things. And we know this from our worldly efforts as well, right? When you get a huge task done, some project at work or what have you, and you feel really good afterwards because you made it the full distance. We can see that there's already some of that joy that arises, that sense of accomplishment that occurs when we have gone the distance, when we have gotten to the result of our endeavors. So I think this is an important part to emphasize in terms of generating that joyous enthusiasm. But the next of these four powers is actually called the power of joy, that we actually need that factor of joy that we cultivate and bring into our practice. I've shared this a number of times before, but one teacher I had in my beginning days of studying the Dharma said that if you're studying the Dharma and it's not fun, then you're doing it wrong. And I think that we have to have that level of joy, of kind of play with the Dharma. I mean, hopefully we see that in terms of, I've never seen any teachers in our tradition that are just kind of like a wet dish rag and just saying, everything's like kind of really awful and miserable and whatever. And we just kind of wallow in that sort of, even though the Buddha did teach some pretty sobering topics, his very first teaching was, guess what, folks, life is suffering. It's unsatisfactory. I mean, there's a lot of serious things within Buddhism. But I see definitely within our tradition a lot of this practice of joy and of the full, wholehearted engagement in the Dharma, that we really, enjoy what we're about. His Holiness and Lama Zopa exemplify this to such a great degree, right? They're not just like dour people. I have seen one Lama. He's actually one of my teachers, so I should be very respectful to him, but he gave that sort of countenance of just always being a bit on the serious side. As a Penner Rinpoche, back in my Nyingma days before I found the Gelugpa tradition through FPMT, I went to one teaching with him, and he was pretty kind of serious the whole thing. And even my partner Patrick, he was there with me, and he went up to get his mala blessed at the end and to thank Penner Rinpoche. And he kind of gave him his mala, handed it over to him, and Penner Rinpoche did his little mantras and kind of blew on it, and then he sort of almost threw it back at Patrick, like, "Here, now get to work." But nonetheless, did see him smile on occasion. He did have that inner joy. He just, had a bit more of that kind of serious side to him that he felt was an important thing to emphasize. And sometimes we do need that, right? We do need people to kind of say, we need to take this a little more seriously, folks. But we also need to have this factor of joy. We need to really be delighted every day that we have the opportunity to practice Dharma. Then, of course, recalling our precious human rebirth and how we have all these optimal conditions can be a source of that. We created this. Every one of you created the life that you have right now to be able to access the Dharma, practice the Dharma. This is what you created. Rejoice in that. The practice of rejoicing is a key part of developing joy, and that's what Rinpoche emphasizes in his book, The Six Perfections. But let's talk a little bit more about this factor of joy, and then that may be all we have time for today. We'll see. And we can answer some of the questions that are in the chat box as well. The power of joy means that when you first engage in an activity, you do it joyfully. And once you have commenced it, you have a sense of being insatiable and that you do not want to discontinue the activity. You kind of want it to keep going. You want that joyous, kind of energy to be manifesting throughout the entire practice. He goes on to say then, it is said that one should generate an attitude similar to children who engage in play without being satiated. I like this example of children in play. My brother was quite amazing. I was 6 years older than him, and he would, be at that age where he wanted to play and do things, and he would play by himself, like tirelessly. I'd be shocked at how much time he could spend just like engaged in play and be totally delighted with it. But I think it's also worthwhile to take a look at adults and how many adults, have this great enthusiasm and joy for what they do. I mean, look at worldly activities. And again, I pointed to athletics before, but we can also see this with people who are artists, musicians, who spend a great amount of work and time, dedicated to their craft, hours upon hours of practicing the cello or something, or doing their painting or their, sculpting or whatever. All these people who dedicate so much time to it. I'm sure that they are joyful in doing this, or they wouldn't be able to do it. If somebody hated being a sculptor and all the work that's involved in it and just despised every moment of it, then and wasn't happy doing it, why would they do it? But people who are dedicated in that way, we see that they bring a joy to what they are trying to accomplish. These athletes who get up at the crack of dawn to go out and run 15 miles or something, and then go swimming and do all the various things that they need to work with their bodies to be able to get a gold medal in the next Olympics or whatever the case might be. We know that people can do this, and they do it joyfully. We see we get better results when we do it joyfully. If we think it's drudgery, if we think it's something that we have to do, that's why I always encourage from the beginning when people start looking at meditation and practicing it, is that when you think, many people have that thought, right? Oh, I have to do my meditation this morning. Well, that already doesn't sound very joyful to me. If we think, I get to do my meditation this morning, I get to do my practice this morning, I get to do my commitments, how wonderful, and I get the opportunity to do this. Well, that's a very different framing of that. That is a more joyful mind. It looks at it from the perspective of how wonderful that I can engage in these things. And then we come into it joyfully. We have a joy that is there through the duration of it, that doesn't really necessarily want to, let it go, wants to, be happily engaged in that as long as we can. Now, obviously, we have busy lives, we have other things we have to do, but we want to leave our cushion with some desire to return to the cushion. Or the same goes for retreat. They often say that you should, as you work with your own retreat and developing some stamina and being in retreat, you should stay in retreat until you can leave retreat still feeling some joy and some wishing that you could stay there. You don't want to leave retreat where you're like totally in a negative state of mind and you go, oh gosh, I just can't wait to get home and back to my normal life. Well, that's not that's not the effect we're looking for. You want to actually feel very joyful at having accomplished what you did and looking forward to doing more, looking forward to doing things again. Let me talk a little bit more about joy, finish off this one, and then we'll take a look at the questions. So that was what was on your handout. Let's look at what Geshe Loden says. He says, through being fully immersed in the enjoyment of the task, you will not want to stop, just as a child does not want to stop playing. This is the right attitude with which to approach your Dharma practice. As Shantideva said, again in his text, in order to complete the task, just as an elephant tormented by the midday sun plunges into the lotus lake. If you imagine this elephant that's been out in the baking sun of the Sahara Desert or wherever, I don't know, it's some of the desert plains over there in Africa, and it plunges into the lotus lake, plunges into this refreshing, wonderful experience. That's exactly how we should venture into our tasks, our Dharma practice, is kind of this great joy upon having the sort of relief that is entailed in that, the good feelings that should be coming with our practice. So that's all for those three. Again, I might come back to four, but let me deal with some of the questions because I do think that there's a few things in here. Connecting with a few people to engage in small group practice has been helpful to me, says Mary Ellen. I'm on my iPad and have limited function. I can't find video, so I couldn't raise my hand. Oh, okay, sorry. I didn't need to read all of that. But anyway, yes, I think being in small groups and engaging in group practice really does help. We do get a lot of enthusiasm from other people. That's why, again, going into group retreats is often quite useful for individuals as well. You may feel like, some of you may feel like you look at your practice and you go, oh, I'm not sure I'm really ready to be in like a whole room of 200-300 people all engaging in practice, but you're ready. I mean, I would say most of you will really benefit from that type of experience because you go there and you get so much energy from the other practitioners. Even if you feel a bit inadequate, you look at it and go, oh, I don't know this practice, I don't know this text, I don't know what this, I'm not so sure about all this. It's okay, you'll be taken care of. It'll all happen. Group practice is really one of the most wonderful things to do. And it's also very powerful in making merit. I often share the words of Geshe Tenzin Temple. He was the second Geshe besides my teacher, Geshe Jampa Gyatso, at Istituto Lama Tsongkhapa in Italy. He's still there teaching the master's program and other subjects there. But Geshe Temple would say that it's so important to do practice together because if you imagine just like one little piece of straw and you were wanting to, sweep up a large pile of dirt, well, if you got this one little piece of straw, you can't really do much with it, right? But if you put a bunch of pieces of straw together and make a broom, then you have so much more power to it, right? I mean, you'd be out there forever with just one little piece trying to get all the dust and dirt, off your kitchen floor or whatever. But this is the power of doing group practice, is that it can really get a lot done, create a lot of merit, but it gives us great joy and enthusiasm when we're doing practice with others. My beginning Dharma career was with Rigpa, with a Nyingma organization, and the main teacher there was Sogyal Rinpoche, and I did have opportunity to retreat with him and a bunch of other people, like 500 other people, in California in 1993. But he was a teacher who would come through only occasionally. There weren't any other teachers, so we had to kind of find our own way of keeping the enthusiasm going in our practice. So many of us who had gone to retreat just would start meeting in people's homes and do a little bit of practice together, a little bit of reading the book and kind of discussing some of Sogyal Rinpoche's teachings in the book. And that was good. It sustained things. It's obviously good to have regular access to teachings and teachers and what have you. And that's what FPMT offers that Rigpa at least didn't at the time. And that's one reason why I went to FPMT, was because it had so much more to offer. But know that we can find a lot of support for our practice just by being with other practitioners. You don't necessarily have to be with a teacher or gurus, what have you. That's helpful. As I said earlier, can gain a lot of inspiration from that. But use what you have in a community, in our own sangha, as a support for that. And again, as Mary Ellen's pointing out, on Zoom too, it's nice to have, we've got this technology now that we don't necessarily need to all get in our cars or on buses or whatever and go to some location to meet. Instead, we can just, in the comfort of our own home, set up something with Dharma friends and have practice together. There's no reason why we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't feel like we're sort of needing to be all completely on our own. Then there's a question from Christopher: how do I maximize my practice while being very busy raising kids and being a business owner? I stay in that task master mode so often. I feel guilty of busyness. Well, first of all, don't feel guilty, Christopher. We all deal with this to some degree, and we all have different lives that require different things of us. And you've got a lot in terms of work, family life, other things that are demanding your time to a large degree. And it is important that we do those things for others, that we not say, oh, well, my practice is so important that I'm just going to neglect all of these other things and then just be fully dedicated to that. And moreover, I think it's the rare practitioner that actually can be fully dedicated to practice and make something out of it. So nonetheless, within trying to balance one's life, to recognize that we have these different components of our life, one of the very first things is to recognize that we should be doing everything within the container that we call our spiritual practice. So being with family, taking care of children, being with partners, spending time like that, we can do that within the container of our spiritual practice. This is the one thing I was trying to point out earlier when we talked about this type of laziness of busyness, is that it's not a set thing, that if you're busy with all these other activities, you can't practice Dharma. It's only when you're not occupied with those things that you can practice Dharma. That's the whole point of Rinpoche's teachings on what he calls, again, bodhicitta mindfulness. We can do these other activities with bodhicitta motivation, and we can make them a part of our spiritual practice. Practicing patience and generosity and joyous effort and ethics while we are with our family members. I mean, giving your time to children who need your time and who want you in your life is an amazing act of generosity. I never had children in this life, and I really respect the amount of generosity that parents have to engage in, because it's huge. And giving resources, of course. Your children aren't making their own money to pay for the things that they get. That's money generally coming from you, your wife, from other people who are involved in their care. So this is an amazing act of generosity. Do it with bodhicitta motivation. When you give an allowance to kids, I used to get an allowance. I don't know if kids still get an allowance, but do that with bodhicitta motivation. Think you're not just giving this money to this child so they can use it to buy things that they will like, or clothes that they wear, or whatever. You give it with the idea that you're giving it to all beings. You're giving it with a much vaster motivation. And you practice bodhicitta motivation with regard to everything that you're doing, and you do it ethically. You avoid lying and doing all the things that might be not so good behaviors to engage in, to deceive others and what have you. You do it with a joyous practice and maintain patience. And this is another thing I admire about people who are parents, is the degree to which they have to practice patience with children. I mean, if I'm around children, it takes a lot of patience for me, because I haven't developed that ability to be around children so well. Even my nephew's daughter, we've been doing our family Skypes, our family Zooms with the pandemic and what have you. And she's even kind of annoying on the screen when she's there, much less in person. I haven't even met her in person, because she's not that old. But anyway, it takes an amazing patience to be around work situations, family situations. Well, practice patience then. and make that a patience that is rooted in bodhicitta, a patience that is rooted in developing skill with being tolerant of harm that one has to experience, difficult situations with other people, what have you. So the bodhisattva practices aren't just the time that we do on the cushion. And even if, again, we don't have any time at all, I mean, some people may have such a busy life with family commitments, with work commitments, that they can't even spend a few minutes a day in meditation, much less, 20, 30, 50, 60 minutes, whatever. That's okay. Make the rest of your day your practice. And that's what I think is really what we're really being called upon. And that is actually how the Dharma begins to change our minds, because the work isn't just what we're doing on the cushion anyway. If we actually are living our lives from that space of the good heart and trying to be a benefit to others in whatever ways we can with those who we do have some karma with. You have karma with the people you work with. You have karma with your clients. You have karma with the family that you have. You have, this incredible karma with these beings. Those are the beings that are in your life, and you need to attend to that. And if we can't practice there, where are we going to practice? This is what we really mean by practice, is how do I take these teachings and bring them to life in terms of how I am in all the other facets of my life. So this is a concept I actually teach on this. Sometimes it's based on something that this self-help guy, Steve Pavlina, taught. It's called living congruently. It means that we don't see our life in compartments, like, okay, here's my work life, and here's my family life, and here's my spiritual life, and here's my friends and my social life, and here's, like we're juggling all these balls and trying to keep it all going. We think that there's one container that all of this rests in. And we live congruently. We live from that space of my main objective, my key way of living my life is to practice bodhicitta, to practice working on myself, developing the qualities of diminishing my own negative tendencies, advancing my positive qualities, and benefiting others, being a benefit to them in whatever way I'm called upon throughout my day. So I hope that helps a little bit. Is, first, and don't feel guilty about busyness. As I said, we all deal with that. Just recognize that this is an opportunity. As much as if you were to say, well, I have all this free time and I can engage in practice. Well, very few people, as I said, if they had their whole day free, would actually be able to engage in committed practice in the way that we think we might be able to. Even go on retreat and you'll see, when you have a full day of just practice time, see how hard it is even there, to get fully committed to practice. So don't think again in this sort of binary thing. Practice time, that's just our dedicated practice times versus our busyness of our lives, but rather see it all coming together. How we actually practice is by bringing the teachings to life in our everyday activities and our everyday interactions with others. Does that help a little bit, Christopher? Okay. And be very kind and gentle to yourself. This is one of the things we're going to see some advice from Lama Yeshe that's coming up that I didn't get a chance to get to today. And stay tuned. We'll do this in January when we resume the teachings on Sunday. I'll share some advice from Lama Yeshe as well as Lama Zopa in terms of how we work with this joyous enthusiasm. I love this topic. To me, this is one of the most interesting of the 6 perfections because it is so key and does play such a central role in terms of how we actually practice the Dharma. So rejoicing, Mary said, rejoicing really helps my practice if it gets tired, beleaguered. I think this is really an important one. If we spend some time rejoicing throughout our day and maybe even just stop occasionally, have a period where you just go, oh, I just need to take a little rejoicing break. That's a wonderful way to feel more reinvigorated. I don't know if there's anything else here in terms of questions. Okay. Oh, here's one that came in from Doris. Didn't see that at the bottom. Does joyful effort come with a feeling of joy, like I would have with my grandchildren, for example? Or is it the joyful use of the word, the state of mind that keeps me wanting to do the work? Maybe both. I think you should have a joyful feeling. I think we actually should feel this unbridled joy that we might see upon seeing grandchildren or seeing something that really delights you. Well, we all have those experiences that we see on videos or what have you that people might share on Facebook of a really touching experience that brings you this sort of joy to your heart. I think we should have that feeling, but it also is the joy that makes us feel very that we want to keep going in the work, just like the joy that I think these athletes or these great artists have in terms of their own practice, that they really feel that it's something that gives them great delight, that there's nothing better than spending that time, on the field doing their work so that they can be greater athletes, or in the studio where they're doing their painting and their sculpting so that they can become more accomplished artists. They really take great delight in it. So I think it's both. It's a joy that you feel. I think we can say it is definitely a happy feeling. In fact, Rinpoche, he often calls this the happiness of Dharma. Unlike our normal experiences of joy that are somewhat tainted because they aren't more sustainable, they don't grow necessarily over time, the happiness of Dharma does grow over time because it's rooted in virtue. It's rooted in all the causes of happiness. And so if we bring that joyous feeling into our practice, then we will begin to taste that happiness of Dharma, the happiness that arises from moving in the opposite direction from where we've been moving since beginningless time. There's in fact a whole little module of living in the path that I taught previously at TNL that's called the happiness of Dharma. This is one of Rinpoche's key teachings, because it does make us feel very enthusiastic about our practice, because we recognize that we're actually about creating happiness for ourselves and for others, but it's different in tone to some degree from the happiness we experience from these fleeting samsaric experiences, happenings, what have you. So we do have to start investing in that, but I think it's got both components to it. And then Doris goes on to say, I'm wondering if I'm supposed to have a joyous feeling. I enjoy my Dharma work and have joy at times, but not constantly. And I think this is, again, I'll admit too, do I have that constant joy? No. But I can begin to feel it over time, that it's changed, that I have more and more joy in my life and can live from that place of joy, because I've been dedicated to the Dharma. I'm not tooting my horn here. I'm just trying to give you an assurance that it does happen. I've been around the Dharma since, 93, when I first encountered Rinpoche, Sogyal Rinpoche's teachings and went on retreat with him. So it's been a while, and some of you in the virtual room here have been practicing longer than me, perhaps, and you can attest to that yourself. I think what keeps you around, that sort of staying power, comes from the increased experiences of joy that we have, the good feelings that we have that are a part of it. And there's nothing wrong with those good feelings. As Rinpoche says, that's the happiness of Dharma. That's the happiness that we actually do get to experience. There's that wonderful phrase from Rinpoche where he says, if we stay dedicated to the happiness of enlightenment and achieving that, all the other happiness is guaranteed. The happiness of this life, the happiness of future lives, the happiness of liberation, even the happiness of bringing others to that state will be a part of that experience. But that's the goal, is stay focused, have that aspiration, again, that we already spoke to earlier, that desires to achieve the happiness of enlightenment, and all the other happiness will come along the way. I mean, I generally see Dharma practitioners, again, the ones that I interact with in our organization, as pretty happy people. It's not to say that we don't have our parts of the day or other times where we deal with difficulties, challenges, grief, whatever. It's not to say that those aren't part of our experience as well, but there's always a buoyant force that kind of comes along that keeps it from just, wallowing in that. We always have another perspective that helps us to transcend that, to come back to a place of joy. At least this is my experience with what I've seen, and I would encourage you all to continue kind of looking in that direction and see what unfolds for you. But it's not going to be necessarily a constant experience, it's something that over time. But I would say somebody like Rinpoche or His Holiness, I see them as pretty much in constant joy. And they both have dealt with, challenges. But I think Venerable Rabina pointed this out in something she was teaching not that long ago. I can't remember where I thought I heard it from her. She was talking about how when Rinpoche was in the hospital, when he manifested this stroke back in April of 2011, quite a while now, almost 10 years. And she said when he went to the hospital, I mean, he was like laughing. I mean, most of us, if we had a stroke, we would be just like so dead serious, and we'd be like so worried and have this fear and this gloom and all of this stuff. And he was like laughing, and he was being joyful with all the staff in the hospital there. And he was even thinking about all the people that were making prayers for everyone else who was suffering in the hospital. He wasn't in this space of just like gloom and doom. So we can be just like Rinpoche. We can be just like His Holiness. It's just a matter of practice, just a matter of continuing to do the work and continuing to experience more and more happiness, because we're about creating happiness, as I said earlier. The Buddhist path to happiness, to well-being. And again, not the same equivalent to temporal happiness, to the happiness we have from these fleeting experiences, but a deeper, lasting happiness that comes when we have truly turned our minds towards the Dharma. So I hope that's helpful. These were great questions. Thank you for bringing these up. I think these are the challenges that we all face, is how to work with this and how to make this manifest in our lives. And don't feel bad if you don't have it yet. If you kind of go, well, I haven't gotten there. Well, keep doing, keep following this advice, keep doing the work that needs to be done. And I'm sure you'll see some results. So, all right. So was that it for today then? I think so. We're just after noon, and it's kind of unfortunate that we have to sort of let this off mid-topic, but it's not that much longer. Over the holidays, try to work with this idea of joyous enthusiasm and recall at least the three powers that we've worked with. The fourth, very briefly, just so you know it, is, and you can read it on the sheet, it's called relinquishing, and it just means sort of setting it aside. I touched on it briefly in the introduction to these four. It doesn't mean that you set everything aside completely and that you never pick it up again. It means that you recognize the need for rest. And I have to admit that, frankly, I'm looking forward to having a couple of weeks of rest where I can actually recharge my batteries. I'm doing a lot of teaching in the new year in particular. I need to kind of be all geared up for that. And so just know that this is an important part of our practice as well. And we do it with bodhicitta. We do it with the understanding that we need to take care of ourselves so that we can keep doing the work. Getting burnt out and frustrated and what have you isn't going to do anybody any good. So do take care of yourself over the holiday as well, but try to bring to mind these four powers, if you can, these four forces, and see what your own, feeling for them is, how you incorporate them into your life, what your successes have already been, where you might need to put more attention, and we'll go from there. Wonderful. Okay, I think I've said enough. Let's go to the prayers. So we're going to start with the prayers of the Shanti Devas text that we've been referring to here and there. These are incredibly powerful prayers and so important in our times. These are always important. These were composed in the 8th century, so they've always been something that is important in terms of how we want this positive energy to manifest in our world. And before we recite these verses, think about those beings that are specifically the objects of your compassion and love, who are experiencing difficulties right now, challenges in their life, obstacles, those who have illness, those who are dying or who have died, whoever it is that we're holding in our hearts in those ways, as well as other groups of beings that we might be thinking about, all of those dealing with COVID, all of those grieving the loss of loved ones from this illness, all of the various beings that we're holding, bring them all to mind as we recite these verses together. And of course, also think that we're dedicating for all beings to have these results through what we've done here today. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. And then as we recite this final verse, really hold this deepest aspiration that is the beginning point, again, the source for so much of our joyous enthusiasm for our practice, this strong desire to be a benefit to all beings, recognizing that we can create the causes and conditions for this and be dedicated to their welfare completely. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Then we do the prayers for our teachers, again, recognizing how precious these teachers are, how important it is that they continue to be in our world to benefit us and others. And we think about the same for all spiritual guides and want all of them to achieve good health and happiness through these prayers. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then for Lama Zopa, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then for Osohita Lama Yeshe's reincarnation, Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us and intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Wonderful. Thank you, Heather, for hosting and doing the prayers. Thank you, Mary, for all of your kind support throughout the year. And thank you all for being here today and for all of your dedicated practice and your involvement with Thupten Norbuling. I may see some of you during the week. I teach again through Saturday. Saturday will be the last teaching of this year, but we'll resume things in the new year. And I hope you have, again, a very peaceful holiday season. Stay safe, stay healthy, and just keep your heart open and find some joy. I'm sure that it's there to be had. We just are dealing with challenges in our world right now. And so rest in that joy. And I'll see you all in the new year or again, possibly before then. All right, everyone, be well.
Thank you.